and just get the masterclass moving. And I want to welcome Pamela Dunn. Pamela is a clinical nurse specialist in dementia at the Daughters of Charity Service, and also now seconded to the National Memory Clinic at Tala University Hospital, because the Daughters of Charity and Pamela and our colleague Evelyn had a lot of experience in running the Memory Clinic at the Daughters. So we're kindly doing this in partnership with Tala University Hospital. So I'm going to hand over to Pamela, who's going to give the first part of the presentation. And after that, Susanna O'Brien, who's a speech and language therapist from the Daughters of Charity, and Aisling Hughes, who's a senior speech and language therapist from the Daughters of Charity Service, will also deliver part of this presentation. So it's a joint act. So just thank you to everyone. I'm very excited about this. So I'll hand over to you, Pamela. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So I'll just get my screen and we will
share your screen there, Pamela. Great.
Okay. Right. So good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you all. And we're just going to talk a little bit about communication and relationships and working with life history. So communication, it is fundamental to all human relationships, and very much we all see that now as part of COVID, how important communication is. It is the way we connect with other people and the way we maintain relationships. When we look at communication, we also look at language, and the words we use can strongly influence how others treat or view people with dementia. And so referring to people with dementia as sufferers or as victims implies they are helpless. So we have a responsibility to use language that's empowering and inclusive of the very diverse experiences of dementia. And we look at Malcolm Goldsmith in his book, Hearing the Voice of People with Dementia. And he reminds us, it is possible to be involved in meaningful communication with the majority of people with dementia, but we must enter into their world, understand their sense of pace and time, recognize the problems of distraction, and realize that there are many ways in which people with dementia express themselves. And it is our responsibility to learn how to recognize these. So we start by looking at some of the common challenges that people have. So a person with dementia may have trouble finding the right word. They may repeat certain words and phrases. They may become stuck on certain sounds. So very often we see that somebody might use, say, the word that to refer to lots of different things, and they're looking for us to fill in the gaps. But in addition, people with dementia are likely to have other sensory impairments, such as sight or hearing problems, and this can make it harder to communicate. And this is something that we can quite easily address in making sure that if somebody wears a hearing aid, that the batteries are working, that glasses are clean and available. So these things are really important. Always attending to the small things that are the very important things. And communication strategies before you speak. Look at the environment. We look at having a quiet environment, removing distraction. So very much we look at clutter, clatter, and chatter. So we want a quiet environment with good lighting and no distractions. Position yourself in front of the person at eye level. Get the person's full attention. And your own body language, look at that. Your body language is relaxed, make eye contact, smile, overemphasize, and exaggerate expressions. And the smile, if you talk about the small things, the smile is such a huge thing in communication. How to speak. Use short, simple sentences. Speak clearly and calmly and avoid raising your voice. Most importantly, don't shout. Slow your pace and allow time for the person to process the information and to respond. Try to avoid asking too many questions or complicated questions. And augment verbal communication with visual aids. So very much we look at visual aids and objects of references. Things to avoid. Avoid you are wrong messages. Avoid, I've just told you that. And avoid asking too many open-ended questions. It can be stressful for a person with dementia if they can't remember the answer. And it's something that we are probably all guilty of. I'm certainly guilty of it. In going up to somebody and saying, what's my name? Do you know me? So just having an awareness of that. Listening, be patient. Someone with dementia may need time to find the right word. Allow time for the person to process and time for them to respond. It's important to listen beyond words. Focus more on the overall message than the literal words being spoken. So read body language and emotions. The person may express disapproval in alternative ways, such as shaking their head, turning away, murmuring, pulling away from us. So it's important to listen to non-verbal messages. So for us all, as we get older, our life history and our life story becomes more and more important. Life story links us to our past, it grounds us in the present, and it helps to give meaning to our lives. Holding on to the stories of our lives is how we maintain a sense of who we are. And despite the many losses that people with dementia endure, the most devastating loss of all for the person is a loss of a sense of themselves. So in the words of Kitwood, a life story book can be an atlas, the compass, the guide to finding their self. So we look at meaningful opportunities for communication and ways to enable communication. And we use a variety of these in conjunction with each other. Some memory boxes, and here we see a treasured box of Special Olympic medals. And we have so many people throughout the country who are so proud of all their endeavours in Special Olympics. But memory boxes can hold lots of different sensory activities, and they evoke that familiar sense by touch. Photo albums, looking at photos with family and friends is hugely important, and it's important that we label and put stories behind the photos. Talking albums, and throughout the country we have resource centres, technology hubs, but these are also available online, and it allows you to record voice or music to picture. And then being aware of conversation prompts, and particularly if somebody's going into hospital or they're moving to a new environment, these one-page personal profiles are very valuable, where they allow enough information for quick access and to enable communication prompts. So using a variety of different sources of tools can be really important. We know there are many benefits to Life Story. We know it's a powerful tool for facilitating meaningful communication. It's drawing on long-term memory. It's enjoyable, and that's the key aspect. It's enjoyable for the person themselves and for staff and family. It recalls skills and strengths. It enhances self-worth and a sense of identity. It builds on understanding and friendships. And we have seen it very well assist in transition between care environments. Digital life story is another form of creating a life story. It's creating a life story using technology, iPads or Android. And a digital life story can facilitate the person to narrate their own experience and memories of each photograph. And this ensures the importance of each memory using a familiar voice. So it's the voice of the person themselves recording and telling their own story back. And this can be very important later on. It's also a two-way communication between the person and their family. And again, very much we have seen the huge benefit of this in COVID in being able to build chapters and send chapters and videos back and forth to family. So this is a page of one life story. So this is just using technology to create life stories. And we build up many different chapters. And these are just an example of some of the chapters we can have. And here we see what a typical app page can look like. And in an app, we're looking for an app that will have photographs and that we add in our text. We have a sound button here, so we're adding an audio, and we can add in video. So by adding narrative and voice recordings to photos, we're building up meaningful memories. And there's a variety of chapters. And this is just an example where somebody would talk about themselves, their childhood, their family and friends, their interests and activities, significant life events, special achievements, special people and special places, their likes and dislikes, favorite music, their faith, and conversation prompts. So there's a variety of chapters that people can create in a life story. And here again, we see what a page of a life story can look like. And we can see here where somebody has created all their different chapters. But music is hugely important. And we know very much the emotional power of music in connecting to people, particularly with advancing dementia. But very often the difficulty is that if people haven't recorded their musical preferences, this can be lost. And this is just one app. It's the Nicky Music app, where it's very useful for people who aren't able to read or write, that they can draw down an image of what represents a photograph or an image of what represents a particular song to them. And so it gives them access to their own playlist. So it's just one way of recording music. But basically the essence is that we actually use some way of recording people's preferences in music. So we have used Life Story in the Daughters of Charity over the last number of years. And very much we see as people progress in their dementia, it very much supports relationships. And this is a very nice quote here that I put down that was said by a staff. She said, having her life story on her iPad helped me to get to know her. I could hear her voice, her laugh. I could see the person she was and still is. So new people coming into the lives of those who have dementia really valued the insight gained from digital life story. And what we know is that even if a person cannot hold on to his or her own narrative identity due to the loss of memory, it can be held by others. So this is really important. So just in summary, some guidelines for enabling communication. So here we see our communication. So care enough to listen carefully. Openly display respect. Make eye and touch contact to attract attention. Monitor the feelings and the emotions behind the words. Understand the language of your posture, facial expression, voice tone, and word selection. Notice the person's non-verbal communication. Interject or identify missing words if appropriate. Communicate by connecting with multisensory cues. Assess for environmental distractions. Try therapeutic fibs if appropriate. Ignore your need to be right, to argue or confront. Observe behaviors as communications. Nurture well-being through communication, connection, and sensitivity. Set the tone for success. And so finally, remember that people with dementia are trying to survive in a world full of uncertainty and insecurity. And to understand their world, we must pay attention to it. To pay attention to it, we have to know something about it. So I'd like to thank all those who've been involved in the Life Story project and the Daughters of Charity and in Life Story work, and particularly Professor Mary McCarran and the families and daughters, staff in the Daughters of Charity. Thank you very much. I'm going to come off my screen now.
Thank you very much, Pamela. That was absolutely so inspiring, and we will have time to talk about that. It's absolutely just every time I listen or see that video, it reinforces why I love the work that I'm doing, and it truly is fantastic. I'm going to hand over now to Ashley Hughes and Susanna O'Brien, who are going to deliver part 2 of that presentation. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm just going to get my presentation here. Everybody see that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Great. Okay. So as Mary said, Thanks very much for the opportunity to present. I'm a speech and language therapist. I've been working in adult services in the Doors of Charity for the last couple of years, and I'm joined by my colleague Susanna, who's also a speech and language therapist working in adult services. So we'll just be giving a joint presentation on and a brief insight into how social stories and visual supports can be used in supporting individuals with dementia. So just a quote saying, "The communication difficulties occur in all forms of dementia, and they do have a significant impact on the person's quality of life," as Pamela has already referred to. It impacts on their ability to access recreation, possibly employment, their social interactions, which then, as we know, can have a big influence and consequence on their ability to have a quality of life and to maintain the relationships in their life. So the work that we do try to support people to overcome some of those barriers and try and help them to be able to communicate with their world around them and to understand the world around them. And some of the ways that we do that are using social stories and visual supports. So a social story, it was a concept developed by a lady called Carol Gray in 1989, and she was a lady working with individuals with special needs, and she found that social stories were a great way of getting information in a way that people understood and could respond to. Social stories are social learning tools that support the safe and meaningful exchange of information. And I just suggest that anybody who wants to get a little bit further information on specifically what social stories are, Carol Gray's own website is a wealth of information on that. So if you even just Google it, or if you have this presentation, you can follow those links there. Social stories are used as a means of clearly communicating information about a context, about a concept, about an environment in a way that somebody with autism or an intellectual disability and or dementia can understand. So as you can imagine, when we use a lot of words disappear as soon as they're said. And for somebody who has memory difficulties or communication difficulties, it's very hard for them to understand and process what you've said. So social stories break down that information, provide it in a specific way about a very specific topic. They help explain the steps that are involved in a particular situation as well. And we'll have an example later on that will hopefully illustrate this. So we also talk about visual supports. So there's a slight difference between social stories and visual support. Social stories have a very clear format and criteria for how to make one, whereas visual supports is a very wide range of things, basically anything visual that will help somebody understand information. And the aim of visual supports is to provide an explanation and a breakdown for a particular event or a situation. And that comes across anything from when you get up in the morning to when you go to bed at night. You encounter a lot of environments and situations, and visual supports help break down that information and help the person to be able to perhaps predict what's happening next. As Pamela mentioned, it can be a scary world with a lot of things happening. So predictability really does help people to manage their own time. It helps people to prepare for change in their day or in their life. It helps them to promote or maintain independence, which we all strive for. Helps reducing anxiety, so people can become anxious about any sort of event. And again, this could be a change for somebody with dementia. They may not have been anxious about something before and they are now. So visual support can help overcome that. It helps to facilitate smooth transition. So if you know what's coming up and it has been shown to you, sometimes it can help overcome again that anxiety about moving between activities. It helps promote positive behavior by increasing somebody's understanding, and it can add structure to their day. So visual supports should always be individualized and should be pitched at a level that's easily understood by the user. And they should always represent information in a concrete way. So what a social story or a visual support are not. So they're not, unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all approach. Every story and every visual support should be individualized to that person. And again, that's what we spend a lot of time in our department doing, is getting all the information so that we can really tailor it to the need and the individual using it. It is not just an easy read information document. So it has to have a specific purpose for that individual using it. It's not just a speech therapy tool. So again, we do training here in service for staff supporting individuals with communication difficulties and dementia on how to make them, because again, they're the people who know the service users and the individuals best. So we'd always say, take a stab at it and we can absolutely support you, but we don't by any means own it, and we'd always recommend people giving them a go. They're not a substitute for a communication system. They're designed to complement or assist with a communication system. They're not a fix or a means of getting somebody to do someone you want them to do. They certainly give information, but it's definitely not a fix. We use visual support quite a lot in our care for the elderly and people with dementia, because they do help transform large pieces of information, breaking them down into very small, easy to understand chunks of information, and usually supported by a picture or something that will really click with the person using it. They provide a reminder for how to complete self-care for some people. So for some people who may have lost that skill, or maybe in the category of starting to lose skills, breaking it down into visual reminders can sometimes help them. So for example, all of the steps, you mightn't realize how many steps are involved in how to clean your teeth, but there's a lot of steps involved when you try to put it on a piece of paper. And giving it to someone can help them maintain their independence. Help somebody to prepare for a new or unfamiliar experience. So for someone with dementia, some of these, they may feel are new experiences for them. So giving them a story on what to expect, for example, going to hospital and what they need to anticipate, can sometimes alleviate a lot of anxiety. Helping someone to cope with the changes to their routine. So a lot of people might end up having to leave their home or move home or end up with someone else caring for them. So helping them to understand what's happening in their own life really does help. The social stories and visual supports really do help a person to sometimes process the distressing events that happen in day-to-day life, unfortunately. For example, the death of a person, it's a very traumatizing event, and it's a lot of information and emotion to try and process. So oftentimes a story or a visual support can help that person just try and sequence their thoughts. If somebody is experiencing a challenge in their day-to-day routine, like that with a skill, whether it be a situation or like using the bus, whatever it might be, we can so often make a support or a story that can help with that. Also, as part of a behavioural strategy, we work very closely with the clinical nurse specialist in behaviour support and the psychology team here. And oftentimes we can help develop something visual that will support their plan as well. So quite a team approach. And the other really important part is consent. Again, we talk a lot about consent, and it's vital to give people the opportunity to make their own decisions about their own lives. And in order to do that, they have to be given information in a way they understand. And so the use of social stories and visual supports becomes really, really important in those situations. So my colleague is going to continue.
Now, I'll just ask you to consider for a second whether you think a social story or a visual support would be suitable in any of these scenarios. So, for example, a death of a friend or a loved one, someone's decreased awareness in other people's personal space, for example, moving to a new house, getting a blood test or a medical procedure, some personal hygiene situations like changing a sanitary pad, which they may have been well able to do a few years ago, but those skills might be declining. A family member that has suddenly become ill, situations like fire drills, information on giving medication, and then also kind of going to the dentist or any kind of medical appointments. So you would say that a social story or visual support would be quite useful in any of these situations. Okay, so there's just some examples here that I'll give you that we have used personally in the Daughters of Charity. So the one on the left here was used for a group of residents, and so it's a very generic one, just because they were going to have a fire drill. So we just made kind of an easy read guide to what exactly will happen. So it just says that we have fire drills in our house. We need to do fire drills to practice for what we need to do if there was a real fire. Fire drills aren't real fires. When the alarm sounds, I must get up with the staff and leave the house. So that's basically just explaining the situation and what will happen. And then on the right, we have just a visual support here for a 51-year-old lady with a diagnosis of mid-stage dementia. So she was just struggling to understand her medications and what medication she was taking and for what purpose. So we just made a little guide here. So just the name of the medication on the left, what it looks like, and then what it's used for. So staff can kind of go over that with her every time she's taking medication. They can just look at the picture and see what exactly it's used for. This was an example of a social story I did for a 58-year-old man with a diagnosis of moderate dementia. So this man was in hospital and he was very anxious about getting his blood taken. So I'll just fly through it now. So it's just getting my blood taken was the title. So everybody gets their bloods checked to make sure that they're healthy. Doctors want to look at my blood to see if I'm healthy. The nurse will tell me before she takes my blood. The nurse will put a small needle into my arm. I will feel a scratch. The nurse will take a small amount of blood from my arm. It will be over quickly. The nurse will put cotton wool on my arm. The doctor will check my blood to make sure that I'm healthy. So that was just a very kind of simple social story about just getting blood taken in the hospital, just to kind of give more information of what exactly will happen. And just note as well that we always would use real photos or real pictures. We would never use kind of cartoons or anything with adults. So just how to introduce a social story or a visual aid then. So I would always recommend to present the social story or the visual support when the person is calm, when everyone is calm and relaxed. So you would never kind of try to introduce this when someone's going through a distressing moment. So timing is key to success. So choose an appropriate time when everyone's relaxed to read the story and make a plan of how to do that. I would say always use clear and simple language when introducing the story. So just even saying, like, I've written this story for you. It's about going to the dentist. Let's read it together now. So read the story as often as required. So some social stories will be read initially once a day, and others might be just prior to a certain situation for which they're written. So for example, the blood test story might have just been done the day before or the morning of the blood test, whereas something more behavioural might need to be done kind of every day. And just when reading the story, I would always recommend to use a calm and friendly tone of voice and just make sure the environment is quiet and comfortable and free of distractions. And of course, then just sharing information does not equal gained consent. So just because you read through the story, it doesn't mean that the person has given their consent. So we would always just remind people of that. So that's it. We've just shared some resources there at the end. So I would definitely recommend, obviously, looking at the Carol Gray website as well. It's very useful, and there's a couple of other useful resources there. Is that okay? Thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Aisling. That was wonderful, and again, another fantastic resource and very practically applied in relation to social stories. So thank both Aisling and Susanna for another wonderful presentation there. So great. So I'm going to move now to the panel discussion, and I'm going to introduce the panel members. And I'm introducing them as they appear on my screen. So Pamela Dunn, as Pamela at the beginning, she's a clinical nurse specialist in dementia at the Office of Charity Disability Support Service, and also now at the National Intellectual Disability Memory Clinic at Tala University Hospital. Martina Duffy, or Martina Lee, is a candidate advanced nurse practitioner in dementia and older persons, and Martina works at the Mauritius service in Kildare and has a lot of experience in supporting people with dementia, so thank you, Martina. Dr. Andrew Allen. Andrew is a research psychologist and a research fellow working with me at the Trinity Centre for Aging and Intellectual Disability. And Andrew has a previous experience in working in the whole area of reminiscence in people in the general dementia arena. Susanna O'Brien. Susanna has just recently presented, but for anyone who's just joined later, is a speech and language therapist at the Office of Charity Disability Support Service. And Aisling Hughes is also a speech and language therapist. So we have a great array of people, I think, with lots of skill. And we have a number of questions that people submitted, and we have questions that have just come into the chat box, and I have tried, or to the question and answer box. And I would just say to people who are on, if you have additional questions, please use the question and answer box, and we will try to get to those questions during the session. And also, I'm encouraging people to use the chat box just to make any comments they have had on the presentations or on the whole masterclass this afternoon. So I'm going to start off, Pamela, and with yourself, because a number of questions have come in. Firstly, where can you buy the albums?
The albums.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, the talking albums, so they are available online. So there's many sources, even Argus can sell these albums. And there's the technology resource rooms throughout the country. And you can get help there with all sorts of aids, including communication aids, and they would have the talking albums there.
And are they expensive, Pamela?
No, they're not. The talking albums aren't very expensive. I wouldn't have a price off, but I think they're around the 60, but there's various prices, but they're not very expensive. And then many people, and there are a variety of ways. Some people then use ordinary photographs, and you can, and particularly for those younger people who are very tech savvy, you can put a number of photographs together on a USB stick and put some music to the background. And with televisions now being smart TVs, you can connect the USB with the music and photos that way. So there are a variety of ways of different pricing that you can use.
Okay.
Yeah,
there are also questions that come in, Pamela, I'll stick with you for the moment, in relation to, is there for your digital life story, and a lot of very positive comments around that, and people wanted to know, is there a special app that you would recommend?
Okay, and again, I'd say if you go into the App Store, there are a number of apps that you can create a life story with. And there are apps specifically for life story, and particularly specifically for dementia and life story. The app we have used wasn't actually created for dementia or life story. It was created to help children to read. It's the Our Story by Open University. We chose that app because it was developed by psychologists, and it's a very easy to use app, and it allows you to build chapters. And it has the key things we were looking for in an app is that it had audio, video, and text. So as I said, you can tranche through the App Store, and you might find one that suits you. The Our Story app by Open University is one that we happen to like, but there are a variety of apps out there.
Okay, great. And finally, Pamela, a question has come in, and that was, how do you see life story being utilised at different stages of dementia? You know, from early dementia right across the stages.
Yeah, and as in the Doors of Charity, we started a project looking at life story 4 years ago, and we have seen its use grow, and we have seen it used by people, and we would say starting a life story when you're cognitively well is really important. So we'd have many people who are creating their life stories who don't have dementia, and they have created their own life story. They build their chapters, and it's a very strengths-based activity. It's something that the person is in the driving seat of what's the stories they want to tell, what's important to them. So that's a hugely valuable piece to catch people when they're cognitively well. In early and mid-stage dementia, it's a great prompting tool. It's great for reminding people of who are the key aspects in their life. You could do a chapter on each day of the week, what happens on a Monday, what happens on a Tuesday. So it's a great prompting and memory aid for somebody at early stage dementia. We have seen it at mid-stage dementia, where people might become distressed, forgetting key aspects in their day, and missing family. So there was one lady, and she had a very close relationship with family, and she would go to visit the family very often. But on coming back from that visit, within a short time, she would have forgotten that she had the visit. So by recording parts of the visit and recording messages, the person could sit back down and re-enjoy that experience over again. So it can be used for capturing key moments that the person can play over and over, and so hugely beneficial in relieving distress. And then we have seen it at very advanced dementia, which I briefly spoke about in the presentation. And it's about that giving somebody back their story. It's about having had the opportunity of gathering somebody's life story and sitting down by their bed and saying, this is you, and giving somebody back their story. And that's really, it's really nice for the person themselves. It's really nice for family and staff. So yes, we have seen it used really well with people with all levels of disability, people with more significant needs, and all levels of dementia. So it's huge value.
Great, thank you very much, Pamela. Excellent. Okay, Martina, I'm going to move to you. It's a question that's come in around end stage dementia, and there's two parts, two questions, Martina. And the first part of this question is, does the person hear at end stage dementia? And the second part was that often people find it difficult, and sometimes care may even appear meaningless when supporting people at a very advanced dementia. And what approaches, Martina, would you suggest?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Professor McCarron, for inviting me here today. Just going back to the first aspect of that question, so in relation to hearing, and it's absolutely, yes, we do know that people at the latter stage of dementia can absolutely hear, and I think it's something we need to be very cognizant about as well. We assume that the person can hear, but also to include the person then. So sometimes if we're in that individual's company, let it be in their bedroom or in their home, that we're very mindful about how we're talking, and it's very dignified, and that we include the person, we don't talk about them. And as well as that, that the environment is very calm and familiar to the person then. So like building on life story work, that things make sense. So it could be that someone has lived beside the beach, for example, where we can recreate the sounds of the waves and the birds. Is a really nice way of hearing really things that are familiar to the person as well. And I don't know if anybody has seen the YouTube piece that's going around the lady that was the ballerina, when she hears the music of Swan Lake. It's really, really powerful when we see her enact the movements of the dance. So absolutely, people can most certainly hear at the latter stages, and we're very mindful of that as well. And in relation to the aspect, Emma, about people feeling aspects of care are quite difficult, and maybe the perception that things are meaningless, I think the life story work is really, really important, because that tells us about the person. So if people are at advanced stages then as well, that connection with people. So it could be that, you know, people wearing their favorite football jersey when the match is going on, that we remember their personhood. These are things that they held dear to them, their family, their friends, someone maybe their love of wearing jewelry, maybe not wearing jewelry, but I think it gives great pride to staff then that we're doing what the person was important in their life, and that we keep it very much alive for the person. And I think there's great dignity and respect, and I think staff can feel quite positive with those interventions then as well. So I hope that answers it, Mary, for you.
Thank you so much, Martina. That's excellent. And I think that's really important, as you say, to really understand that, you know, that anybody who's at the latter stages of their life, that hearing is the last sense actually to go.
Yes.
So we need to be just so mindful of that. And as I always say to people, just, you know, would you want the person to hear what you're saying? And then if you don't, then don't say it.
Yes.
And just to be really careful about that. And as you say, Martina, you know, I often think, you know, words like dignity and identity flow lovely into every mission statement. But when I go into a room or a home with somebody with dementia, and there's no memorabilia, there's nothing that tells me about this individual, really, how can you uphold somebody's identity if you don't know anything about them? So I think there's some of the messages that has come across from both presentations this afternoon and from some of those questions. So thank you, Martina. Andrew, I'm going to move to you, Andrew, and a couple of questions have come in here in relation to reminiscence. And, you know, it's often used with the general population, but sometimes this individual has used it and it may cause somebody to become upset. And how do you manage that? And the other one was that if around therapeutic fibs or misbeliefs that sometimes are challenging for people with dementia, and how you manage those. So there's two questions there, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, just with regard to the first question in terms of people, becoming upset, which, I suppose can happen with anyone when they engage in kind of reminiscence or thinking back on kind of memories kind of throughout their lives. I mean, generally in my own practice, I would generally try to avoid any topics that I would imagine would have a high probability of making someone upset. But it's always the case, you know, regardless of what topic you discuss, you know, even things like major life events, something like weddings or things that you might kind of think are going to, generally be kind of feel good. Like they can sometimes bring up, they can kind of lead a kind of train of thought where someone might think of something more negative. So I think in cases like this, I'd kind of drawn on what Pamela was saying as well about kind of, having a kind of a strengths based approach, where if you're looking at something that's happened in someone's life that was, potentially negative or traumatic, to try and see if there was something, some way in which they kind of grew from it. So, I mean, for example, I had one person who became very obsessed from remembering being made redundant. He used to work in a kind of a manufacturing job that doesn't really exist anymore, but like he kind of learned, he came away from the experience he kind of learned how to learn new skills, and he got on better in life kind of going forward, like when he found a new job. So that would be one example where you could kind of see how a negative experience you kind of came out of it kind of stronger. I would say as well, just sometimes staff as well can sometimes, I think it's important for staff to go easy on themselves also, because sometimes if someone becomes upset when remembering something, it's easy for you, if you're helping to run a group, or if you're facilitating a group, to kind of think that you've hurt the person in some way. But I think it's just worthwhile remembering that, a lot of people have kind of difficult experiences, and sometimes they just want to share that in a group. So, don't beat yourself up about it either. If somebody becomes upset kind of during the group, just try and see if you can kind of steer them towards, was there something positive that kind of came out of it? Yeah. And then in terms of the other question you're asking about, I think Pamela as well touched on therapeutic fibs, or I suppose just more generally the idea about memories or even beliefs about the present that aren't, factually true. So I suppose I'd just flag up that even, in the neurotypical population, I mean, anyone, anywhere, like when it comes to autobiographical memory, Richard Roach, who I used to work with, I don't know if he was the first person to say this, but he gave he was comparing the analogy that a lot of people think of their memory as being like a book or a film that you have on DVD that's the exact same objectively every time you play it back. But I suppose autobiographical memories are really more like plays, in that they're things that there's a given script, but every time it's performed, it becomes slightly different, and the context will sort of change it. So I think it's worthwhile thinking about our own, anyone's kind of autobiographical memory is kind of subject to kind of changes depending on what the context is around them. But in terms of what we say to people, if you're a practitioner or a clinician, like my own preference would be to try to avoid, telling someone something that's patently untrue, if you can avoid it at all. I think an important point that's been coming across through these sessions is to avoid kind of challenging people or confronting them about, that's not factually true, etc. Like, I think it's worth just looking at kind of the context of what the person's saying, and it could be the case that what they're saying has a truth in terms of its emotional value, so you can kind of validate how the person is feeling, without necessarily challenging them on what they're saying or trying to correct them. Or trying to back them up and saying, yes, that is true, even when it's not. So those would be my own thoughts, just from my own experience. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Andrew. Yeah, and I think your last point there, in terms of validating the feelings inherent in the message in some way while you're ignoring the content. So yes, somebody may. And avoid trying to confront. And I think Pamela and our other speakers spoke about that today, really trying to avoid confrontation or that you are right. No, you have got to enter into the world of the individual with dementia rather than expecting the individual to enter into our world. And I think that's what's really important. So, and I think that's come across loud and clear. So thank you very much for that, Andrew. Okay, I'm going to move to Susanna then. Susanna, there is, I think we have put up the resource. There's been a lot of requests in terms of how we can create the social stories, and is the resource. And I think June has put that into the chat box, and certainly we will send, people will get a copy of this presentation, and I know that you have included where we can access that information from there. Yeah. And one of the questions that has come in, Suzanne, is, do you feel that social stories would be helpful to people with dementia? And I know you already spoke about this, actually being admitted to hospital. And what's the difference in a social story and the hospital passport, which some people in Ireland may be familiar with.
Yeah, I definitely think the social stories can be very helpful for specific situations that are happening in hospital, like any kind of medical procedures, just getting people ready to know what's going to happen to them. I suppose the difference between the hospital passport and the social story is who it's for. So the hospital passport, I suppose, is for information about the client with dementia, and it's for the staff in the hospital to get to know them better. So to get to know what's important to them, to get to know their likes and dislikes, any of their medications and things like that. So that's for the staff to know the person better. So they're very useful, and hospital passports definitely have their role, and they're great. And then I suppose the difference then is that the social stories are for the person with dementia themselves. So they're not for the staff. So it's just helping the person become more informed on what's about to happen to them. So be it a medical procedure or whatever it is that's going to happen in hospital. It can be great to just to give more information on that in a very clear and concise manner. That would be the use for social stories.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, so that's a nice way of explaining that. Social story is just for the person, whereas the hospital passport is more about for the staff in the hospital to understand key issues of importance for the individual. Right, okay, that's excellent. And I know that you also mentioned that people, that they really, do you run specific training in terms of teaching frontline staff on how to create social stories?
Yes, so I suppose we have done training here in the past for staff on how to do that in the different situations that that they can be useful in. Aisling would probably know more about that because she's been here longer than me, but yeah, we definitely have any of the kind of the staff that are supporting people through difficult situations. So yeah, I would have gotten a lot of requests for staff members who are supporting people who might be, they might be residents, they might be only coming into residential setting, they might be changing homes, things like that. And we would always kind of support staff in how to make those stories. Yeah.
Lovely, great, thank you very much. That's wonderful, and it may be something that we will come back to, because obviously communication and the whole area of communication is just so central to everything that we do, and it's just such a neglected area sometimes within services, and people's understanding is just so important. As I think, to make living with dementia bearable for people, we've got to understand communication. So thank you very much, Susanna, for that. Aisling, I'm going to move to you now, if you don't mind, and have a couple of questions here. And they are talking, one of the questions is on working with people, and it may have already been answered by other members of the panel, but nonetheless, working with people with more severe ID and dementia, are there any additional tips that you would have around communication?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with that cohort quite a lot. I think for one of the biggest things is having a routine, and I saw there was a question there about predictability and having a routine. And a routine doesn't mean that something has to be regimented every day, but I think the fundamental things are the same every day. Like when they get up in the morning, what's their morning routine? What is there kind of a vague routine in the afternoon, and is there a vague routine in the evening? Because again, as somebody progresses, they're the things that the person shouldn't have to worry too much about, that they're already well established and that it's not placing a demand on somebody. So it just means that there doesn't have to be as much communication around those well-established routines. But then again, within that, having a bit of flexibility in between those well-established pieces, so that the person does have a little bit of variety and a little bit of choice over those. Pamela referred to objects of reference, and I'm not sure if anybody has worked with them, but objects of reference are objects that are used to represent an activity. So if somebody picked up a mug and waved it at you, you always know that's somebody talking about a cup of tea. And the same is that for somebody who has communication difficulties. We pick out objects that represent different parts of their day, so that it's another element of letting somebody know this is about to happen. So you show them the object before the activity or the event is about to happen. So it gives that person a little bit of time to adjust to what's about to happen in them. And because again, there's a lot of latent and delayed processing of information with this cohort. So giving them as much warning and as much information before something's about to happen is really, really important. And as well, giving them a huge amount of time to process what you're asking them to do. And that could be as simple as just asking them, do they want to go for their shower? Do you want to go on a bus drive or whatever it is, just giving them a little bit of time to process what you're asking them to do. And that combined with the objects of reference can be a really, really good support for people with the severe intellectual disability and then onset of dementia.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent, Aisling. And I suppose we would just so often see as well that people with dementia very often find it very difficult to transition from one activity to the next. So they get stuck in the task.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
so using the object of reference then really I would find helps in transitioning. If you want somebody perhaps to use the bathroom facilities, and if you use toilet roll or something like that.
Yes, something they relate to. Yeah,
exactly, something that they will relate to. That's excellent. And another a question, Aisling, that you might be able to assist with is, we have a lady with mid-stage dementia and she goes home every Friday for the afternoon. But when she returns, she forgets that she has been home and is constantly asking staff to go back home again and appears very distressed and appears to have forgotten what has happened. And have you any tips on how we can manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see this quite a lot across the board as well. Some of the things that we have found helpful would be, first of all, a lot of people would have a difficulty with the concept of time. So understanding that they go every Friday, especially with the onset of dementia and memory difficulties and language barriers, understanding somebody telling them you've just been or you're going next Friday means absolutely nothing to them. And so sometimes all they hear is no, and then you get anxiety. So one of the things that I would suggest is having a weekly kind of planner, or even just a calendar up on the wall or in that person's room that shows in a concrete way the days that they are going home, or whatever activity it may be, but in this case going home. And in that you might have a little picture of the individual or their own house or whatever it may be. Then I would say that when they do their home visit, that they can take a little picture or a small video or a memento back with them. So whether it be their favorite chocolate bar that they bring back, or their teddy, or a photograph, little video, something like that, so that when later on, if they do ask staff about the visit or their care about the visit, that instead of saying, no, you were home, you can show them, here, this is when you were at home. So it's framed in a more positive way, and it doesn't have to become, that factual, tug of war. And then if they're finding that it's a big distance and it's only weekly, and 7 days is a long time for somebody to keep asking, am I going? Refer them back to the calendar and say, then perhaps insert something like a phone call on the Monday or the Tuesday, or a Skype call, or a 5-minute FaceTime or something. So it adds in something, less demanding, but something positive to look forward to. So all of a sudden you've gone from maybe someone asking constantly to, when is the next visit, that you can say, well, maybe not today, but tomorrow you're going to give them a call, and then look at your calendar, you're going home on the Friday, and then show them the video. So it becomes a little bit more of a positive interaction.
Lovely. That is fantastic. Thank you very much, Aisling. We're just almost out of time. I think the panel members have picked up on a number of questions that we have given, that has come in. So thank you for that. And again, if people have any comments, put them into the chat box before we leave. I just want to say thank you very much to our panel members, to people who presented, to Pamela Dunn, to Aisling Hughes, Susanna O'Brien, to Martina Lee or Martina Duffy, and to Andrew Allen. I really want to thank my own team, June O'Reilly, particularly, who has been so helpful in the setting up of these masterclasses, and Gavin Dan. I really do hope that you find them useful. We will have one. We don't have a masterclass next week, but we have one, I think it's on the 8th, and it's on understanding the language of behaviour. And again, we will have the same type format with a panel and a couple of presentations. So hopefully you will be able to join us for that. And again, we will have put up this presentation online, and thank you all very much. So until the next time, thank you.